Evan, thank you so much for coming on the show. We've been wanting to talk to you for a while. In fact, we had this scheduled at one point, and I think it was actually my fault that it got rescheduled, so my apologies.
No
I apologized on air for that. We were talking a little bit before we went live, just like the grind of this thing. Like to run for Senate, statewide race, federal office, and what's that been like? I mean, what led you to like, I'm going to do that?
I just think our politics in America are broken. I mean, the politics of division and extremism have really taken over, and it shouldn't be that way. Most Utahns, most Americans don't fall within the extremes on either end of the political spectrum, and most Utahns and most Americans have far more in common on even the most divisive issues facing our country than they do in difference, or at least more in common than they think they have. And so I think we're really at a crossroads as a country. And I know people say that every election cycle, and it sounds sort of like a political campaign year trope, but it really isn't. I think we have gotten to the place in our country where we're going to decide whether we're still committed to a system of self-government. We have a democratic republic here, and defined by a constitution, et cetera. And we have people in the country who want to tear that down and want to try something new and openly talk about, our needing a strong man rather than a system of self-government, and how that will be better than what we have now and help us solve problems that we can't solve in our current system. And I just disagree. I served in the CIA for over 11 years and lived in countries controlled by dictators and authoritarian regimes. They don't solve anything. I mean, they put themselves first and not the interests of the people. So I think it's a time for most Utahns, a majority of Utahns, a majority of Americans who aren't represented by the extremes in our politics to stand up, form new coalitions, and help move past this period of such chaos and instability in our country.
You mentioned the CIA, and it seems like the CIA, FBI, and a lot of institutions in this country are losing credibility, whether rightly or wrongly, right? And maybe that's not even the right word. Just like it seems like there's a general distrust in our institutions, unlike I've ever seen in my lifetime. What is your take on that? Is that a good thing for America? Like, how do they regain trust outside of we'll talk about Trump and Lee and all that type of stuff. But why do you think they've started to lose trust? Because they used to be the folks that we all kind of looked to as strong institutions.
Yeah, I think it's. You're right. And the data make very clear that what you're saying is the truth, that Americans are losing faith in all kinds of institutions. I mean, whether it's, Congress or media or religion, frankly, I mean, on and on and on, they're losing faith. And I think it has something to do, at least in government, because that's my purpose here, is to change that piece of it. But I think we just have too many people in government, even those, and especially those who are elected to office, to federal office, who have come to put their own interests first, or the interests of partisan tribes first. And when that happens, we lose out as a people. I think back to George Washington's farewell speech, and he warned against the spirit of parties and how at some point that might overpower people's commitment to our system of government and to the interests of the country. And that could present a threat to the future of the republic. And I think we live in those days now. We're living it. And that's what we've got to change. That's why, for example, I'm refusing to take any PAC or special interest group money as a part of this campaign. And while I'm declaring my independence from the extremist factions and party bosses, et cetera, because we have to get back to putting people first. And I think if we do that, then it will increase trust and increase our ability to provide, collectively, all of us together as Americans, for a better future for our country. And I think you could draw parallels to, other sectors in our society, whether it's, religion or it's, media, for example.
Corporations, all of them.
Large corporations, yeah. If they, if people are putting themselves first, if it's, rather than, and some of that's good. Don't get me wrong. I mean,
Sure.
our system is designed to leverage the idea that people will pursue personal interest and to check that so it doesn't get out of control. But the reality is, if we're going to live in a free country, we're never going to have enough checks to prevent people from starting to serve their own interests beyond what is healthy for the country, certainly beyond what is healthy for the country in the government context. So we depend on people acting with goodwill to some degree, even as they do pursue to some degree also their self-interest. But that's out of balance right now, at least in government, where people are just all in on, look, I've got to do this so I can stay in office. I have to say this thing I don't actually believe so I can hold on to power. I've got to overturn an election because it didn't go well for my side. And that, I think, that kind of attitude where you're putting yourself and your tribe above the interests of the country overall is certainly what leads people not to trust government or people in government.
And which is not like a new phenomenon. I mean, January 6th is a new phenomenon. We've never seen anything like that. But, Hillary Clinton said the election was stolen from her in 2016, right? Like, this is a pretty, disturbing pattern that we're seeing. Like, the loser doesn't say that they lost, right? It's like, we lost, but we lost because of Russia, which was the thing in 2016, and in 2020, I don't even know what the thing is, right? But how do we gain trust? Like, if we don't have trust in elections, then it seems like the whole system breaks down.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? Like, I'm not even sure.
Yeah.
And I think I know it's really easy, and we'll get to Trump, I promise.
We don't have to.
Yeah,
by the way.
Well, we kind of have to.
Up to you.
But I know it's really easy to blame one man and kind of one party on this, but it does seem like, and nobody's ever taken, I want to be clear, I've never seen anything like what happened in 2020, and this idea, he still says he won and all that type of stuff. But Hillary Clinton also was saying, she conceded, but then she, there's tons of clips out there of her saying, the election was stolen, I won, all this type of stuff. Stacey Abrams in Georgia, same thing, right? This isn't a strictly partisan one-party issue, this whole idea. So how do we bring election integrity back?
Well, I think it's important for all of us to parse out, which of those claims, if any, have validity. I mean, look, elections in the world do get stolen, and there are also people who claim that the election was stolen from them when it's not true.
Yeah.
And this is part of the challenge, right? But that's why, we need to exercise our intellect and our discernment and to study facts and to use reason to discern, okay, what claim is real and what claim is not real? What does the data say? What do the facts say? And then use reason to analyze it. I think we have to get down to that level because we are, as you point out, in a place now in our politics where people are losing confidence in our system of self-government. I mean, it's really, you hear people now say, look, and I've heard people, by the way, on the far left and the far right say this, that democracy, our democratic republic, our republic, however you want to call it, even that is partisan now. But we all know what we're talking about.
Yeah.
The system where we elect our leaders, and when we vote them out, they go. People are losing confidence in that, and if we're not able to shore that up, I agree with you that it will destabilize the whole country. But now we have people on the far left and the far right saying, look, democracy is just failing on delivering solutions.
Yeah.
And we've got all these mounting challenges, inflation, climate-related issues, an exploding national debt, healthcare costs that are way too high, et cetera. We don't solve these problems anymore, but a strong man could. That's where we're getting. I mean, that's where the conversation is going now. And again, I've had conversations with people on the far left and the far right where these kinds of things are said. And we have got that, we cannot go down that road. It is a dark road. I've lived it overseas. It's a terrible way to go. What we need to do is ensure that our system is functioning properly. And for that to be the case, I think we need to make reforms. Absolutely. They're badly needed. But to throw the entire thing out and take on a new form of government that puts one person and a small cadre of sycophants around them in power would be a gross mistake. Now, we're not on the doorstep of that yet,
right?
But increasingly there's momentum behind this idea in America that maybe our current system just isn't the right one. Not that we need to reform it and change it, which is where I am, but we need to abandon it and have something else.
Yeah, I mean, you hear like these calls like we should expand the Supreme Court, kind of stack the Supreme Court. I mean, it's like at every branch there's these types of discussions, right? Do you think things have gotten better under Biden since Trump left?
I think we remain a very divided country, and we continue to fail to overcome major challenges. I mean, that's where we are, and that's sort of something I've been saying now for years, which
Hmm.
is why I've run as an independent now 2 times. I don't think the parties are rising to the challenges that we face in the country. I think that we have to get back to our core ideals that we're all created free and equal, and therefore we have a system of self-government in which we elect our leaders. And there is such a thing as objective truth, and reason matters. And we need to just go back to those basics. And I don't, frankly, now see it happening in either party. You know, I've been a registered independent for most of my adult life, but on the Republican side. And I
Hmm.
became the chief policy director for the House Republicans in 2015 and 16. And before that, served as a national security advisor in Congress for Republicans. But I don't feel at home now in the Republican Party. It's going in a direction I can't support, but I'm also not a Democrat. And so, like many people, you end up feeling a bit politically homeless. But where I do find my home is by going back to those core principles that our country was founded upon. Yes, we haven't lived up to them perfectly. I get it. But they are core truths, I think, that we're created free and equal. Those are truths about who we are as human beings. And government needs to be recentered and aligned with those truths. And also our deepest human purpose, which in my view is to pursue happiness or joy. And
Yeah.
government needs to be aligned with those things. And I think both parties are failing to get us there, which is why I run as an independent.
Yeah, what do you think of on the national security front, the Afghanistan pullout, the decisions that have been made around Ukraine, Russia? It just seems, and by the way, the whole country agrees with you that like Biden's approval rating is as low as Trump's was, right? Like it does seem like it is like, nobody's way excited about either party currently.
Right.
What do you think about those two things, though? It seems like that's hurting his approval rating and the mood of the country more than anything.
Well, pullouts are never easy. In fact, they're almost always messy. This one in Afghanistan was far messier than it needed to be. I mean, it was a total disaster. And I also question the strategy as well. I'm somebody who thinks we spent way too much time in Afghanistan and our goals were way out of step with reality. We were never going to make Afghanistan into a kind of America during any kind of reasonable horizon. Yet we stayed there for 20 years and spent a ton of money. I think we should have had much more modest goals, and I do think it is still important that we deny Afghanistan as a safe haven to terrorist groups. And the fact that Ayman Zawahiri was just killed by U.S. intelligence recently, and it's been a few months now, but in a residential area in the capital of Afghanistan, in Kabul, tells me that they do feel some confidence in reconstituting themselves now in Afghanistan. Al Qaeda does.
Hmm.
So, I think we have to take that very seriously. I don't want to see us go in big to Afghanistan again. I think we need to find new ways to prevent Al Qaeda and other terrorist groups from operating freely there, and hopefully we can do it. But I question whether it was right to do an absolute withdrawal of even special forces and intelligence that could have helped us, prevent, major Al Qaeda plots from developing inside Afghanistan. I question the wisdom of that. As far as Ukraine is concerned, I actually think both parties have gotten that wrong for a long time, but I
Hmm.
do think our support now for the Ukrainians and for their fight against Russia is important.
Hmm.
And the criticism I have is that we were just too slow to get there. And if we had done more to strengthen Ukraine much earlier, I think that would have changed the calculus for Putin, and he may not have decided to escalate his invasion, which actually started in 2014,
Hmm.
but has escalated over the past year, of course, dramatically. But I think if we had gotten there early and done more to support, we could have prevented that. That could have helped us on the inflation side. We could have avoided a lot of energy inflation and other inflation as a result, and we could have saved most importantly, of course, a lot of lives that way. Now, I don't want to see us go in there with our own troops. I've also been, cautious and been opposed to a no-fly zone that we would police at this point, because I think the risks are too great that we would end up in a direct shooting war with Russia that we wouldn't be able to control, and it could spin out of control very quickly. It could escalate in a way that we wouldn't be able to control. So I'm for providing military, intelligence, humanitarian, and economic support to the Ukrainians so they can fight this fight, and so that we hopefully stop Russia and Ukraine and we don't see them go further. Because if we don't stop them in Ukraine by helping the Ukrainians fight this fight, Putin will go further. He's proven his belligerence and his ambitions. They go well beyond Ukraine. And if we don't stop him there, we'll see a further destabilized Europe and a more dangerous world for all of us.
Do you buy the argument that if we just would have said, okay, Ukraine won't join NATO, that he would have stopped? He wouldn't have done this?
No, because Putin believes in the reestablishment of the Soviet Union in some form. And so that's his big ambition. I mean, he's a former KGB officer, so he still has these grand ideas of what Russia should be and what Russia still is. And he's still trying to marry the reality of his, Mexico-sized economy with his ambitions. And so even if we, I think, had said, all right, Ukraine will not join NATO, I think actually that may have even provoked him further. So it's tough. I understand, how someone might have concerns, if a Russian leader might have concerns about that, of course. But for Putin, I think it's much more than just, hey, we don't want NATO on our doorstep. I think it's about this grander vision for what Russia should be, what he believes Russia still is. He doesn't look at Ukraine and say this is a sovereign, independent nation. He thinks this is a nation that is part of Russia but has been misbehaving and gone rogue, and we need to bring it back in. It belongs to us.
Right.
So that's why I believe in peace through strength. And when I look at Taiwan, it's the same situation. Let's learn lessons from Ukraine and our experience there, and let's not be too late like we were there. If we help Taiwan strengthen itself early enough, we can change the calculus for Xi Jinping, who, like Putin, wants to remain in power forever. And if these military adventures don't go well for them, that can threaten their hold on power. And so we need to make sure that Taiwan is a harder target than I believe it is right now. But again, let's help them fight this fight. Let's avoid having to get involved ourselves.
Let's pivot to Utah. How do you view the future of Utah? I mean, this state has changed dramatically, even over the past decade. For a lot of people, they see, like, we're in Lehigh, kind of the heart of Silicon Slopes right now doing this podcast. This used to be all farm fields. This used to be a completely different landscape. It's changed dramatically. Tech community played a big role in that. Population growth playing a big role in that. What do you think, like, our challenges are, and what do you think the future of Utah could be?
What I see for Utah is a tremendous opportunity to help lead the country. And I see that in government, and we can come back to that, but I also see that in industry, in technology. The country is really struggling right now for a variety of reasons. Meanwhile, we have one of the fastest growing economies, one of the fastest growing populations. Of course, that has a lot to do with the growth of the tech industry here. And a lot of challenges are coming around as a result of that. So we have to overcome the challenges created by those successes, which is a high class problem to have, although those challenges are very serious, whether it's housing costs or air quality, et cetera. But if the tech industry isn't growing here in Utah, we'll grow somewhere else. And I don't think we want to pass up just a tremendous opportunity we have here for leadership on that front either. So my view is that that this state, for a variety of reasons, is a special place, and that America needs Utah's leadership now. And I see that politically. I think we have a kind of politics here where we come together to solve problems. Even you take two groups that are definitely very different, have different interests and even values. Here in Utah, we find a way to come together and to solve problems. It's not perfect, but we find a way forward. I think that has a lot to do with our history as a state. When my ancestors first came here in the mid-1800s, when they showed up here, it was a tough place to settle and live, and it's still a tough place. And I mean, it's still a harsh environment, though breathtakingly beautiful. And they knew they had to work together to solve problems. And I think, and they did. And if you read the early histories of Utah, they talk about the rugged individualism of the West, and they talk about how that existed here in Utah, but that there was also a sense of community that people were really committed to. And that still informs the way we live here in Utah. And I think we still have to live this way. And the rest of the country is not. And so that's why I think, we have something to offer the rest of the country. And I think you can see that in business and in government. And that's certainly what we're trying to do with this race, what I'm trying to do. But I also, again, see it in our growing technology industry that, more and more talent is coming to Utah, more and more capital. People are having very successful exits. They're interested in reinvesting that money in Utah. I was speaking with a donor the other day, a major donor, who said, "Hey, let me know if you have any recommendations of businesses in Utah I should invest in. We're always looking for Utah businesses to invest in."
Yeah.
And I said, "Well, noted. I'll keep that in mind." But there's a reason for that. I think people understand around the country that Utah is a different and special place. And we need to make sure that we live up to that. I think it's important for us to make sure that Utah is an inclusive state, a welcoming state, where our leaders, our tech leaders, and our other business leaders can hire new talent to come in, where we have opportunities for Utahns born and raised here, like us. But I see us as a state sitting in a place where we can help the country grow and thrive and get past all this division and extremism.
Yeah. How do you think Governor Cox is doing?
I think he's been, for the most part, a force for unity and constructive government. And I think we need more of that. And I think we see it in other leaders too. But I think he has been a voice of reason when we've seen extremist actions taken by one side or the other. And we need that kind of leadership. And I think we need that kind of leadership at all levels. I mean, there's all the extremes, especially in our system now, are always going to be a challenge. And right now, I think they have an outsized voice in our politics. And we need leaders who are going to always listen to everyone, but find the sensible, constructive way forward on issues. And I think he's largely done that, and I applaud it.
How do we manage the growth? Like, it really is a problem. And like you said, they are success problems. Like, we would have loved to have this problem in 2010, right? Around we got to figure out what to do with rising housing costs. We got to figure out what to do with air quality, all this type of stuff. Like, they are problems that come with success, but nonetheless, they are problems.
That's right.
And some of them are, I find, really difficult to solve, like rising housing prices, air quality, water, all of these types of things that are kind of top of mind for a lot of Utahns. And if you look at Silicon Valley, if you don't work in tech in Silicon Valley, you no longer live in Silicon Valley. You've kind of been priced out. And we do have to be careful as a state to avoid those pitfalls. I don't think, I'm saying this, I run the organization called Silicon Slopes. I don't think we want to use Silicon Valley as a model. Right. Of good governance and how to handle this type of thing. We need to forge a different path, but I'm not sure that there's been a pretty comprehensive or at least agreeable solution to most Utahns on how to do that.
Yeah, well, what I would like to do is ensure that when we talk about Silicon Slopes, that it extends beyond the Wasatch Front.
Yeah, all of Utah.
All of Utah. If you go to rural counties, as we do on the campaign, we've been to every county in the state multiple times, even ones where there aren't a lot of people at all. But I've made a point of that because I think it's important. But sometimes, and I love these places, but sometimes you feel as though you're going back in time.
Right.
When you look at the infrastructure, when you look at the opportunities they have or don't have. And we've got this tremendous growth and so much happening on the Wasatch Front. I want to see that expand beyond the Wasatch Front And what does that take? And I won't pretend to have all the answers, but I think part of it is infrastructure development. We need to make sure that, that the broadband, which is very good actually in some rural communities in Utah, but I think we can strengthen it and make sure that that's, more, universally true that rural communities have excellent access to the internet and at speeds that allow them to work in technology.
Yeah.
And but also other kinds of investments, having quality schools in these places, ensuring that there's medical care, even clinic level medical care. These kinds of investments allow more people who might work for a company here on the Wasatch Front to live further away without having to make a killer commute every day. They can work remotely, and frankly, they could work for companies outside of Utah, or outside of America, even if they have that kind of connectivity. And I think that the pandemic has helped us realize that we can work this way. We can work remotely efficiently. I know other people have different opinions about that. It's complicated, but my view is that we've learned how to do that more efficiently. So I think if we focus on expanding that opportunity, it takes pressure off on the housing side. It also takes pressure off, off the air quality issue on the Wasatch Front. Water is more difficult. Rural communities are struggling with that even more than the Wasatch Front is in many places. And so on that front, I think as a state, really as a country, the whole West, but certainly as a state, we need to improve our conservation practices and infrastructure, and that's going to take major investment. I've been pleased to see that the Congress has approved a $10 million budget to study what we need to do to save the Great Salt Lake, which is essential. I look forward to seeing the results of that, and it's going to be a heavy, heavy investment. An infrastructure investment, but we're also going to have some tough conversations about how we use the water resources that we do have. And then I think we do have to respond to the broader climate challenge. And, I was raised by a conservationist, a mountaineer, a Republican conservationist my father, who believed that, it was important to protect the environment. I remember seeing him in the garage 30 years ago, separating the trash into piles, not knowing what he was doing, but believing he had gone mad.
Yeah.
But he wasn't. He was ahead of his time. And I think we have to take seriously this responsibility of stewardship for the environment.
When it comes to rural Utah, I get asked this question a lot too. When we go out there, we have chapters and things like that. Like, how do you extend Silicon Slopes outside of the Wasatch Front? And we've done that to some extent to Ogden has a strong community, Logan has a strong community, St. George, fastest growing metropolitan in the entire country, right? St. George is doing incredible, but there's tons of water issues there. Yeah. But you said something there that I think is really interesting. It's kind of like going back in time, and I think that's what's beautiful about some of these places. It is they're like, yeah, we want that. We don't want, what we're seeing in Lehigh or any of that type of thing. And it's always the questions and the things that get pitched to me from government officials is well, just have one of these companies set up a satellite office down there.
Not that easy.
Right? It's so that doesn't do anything. And by the way, they're not going to. We need to be honest. They're not going to do that. That's not just imagine.
Not in the near term.
Imagine even if they did do that, if there's public markets go a certain way, their business starts going, what's the first office that gets close? It's that satellite office in Fairview. I just don't see that happening. I think what we need to do is make them feel as though they're part of all of Utah. It's not a separate thing, right? They're part of this. What you do to grow that is community, foster entrepreneurship, foster opportunity, like you were mentioning. Because if you look about it, that's the history of Utah, even the history of Utah Tech. One of the biggest tech companies to come out of this state over the past 15 years is Pluralsight. If you went up when he started Pluralsight in 2002, 2003, you would feel like you were going back in time then, right? It was Farmington, it was Lagoon. That's just about it. It's just farmland and stuff, right? So we've done this before in the state, and what it takes is the fostering of entrepreneurship, the fostering of connections. But that's easier said than done, right?
Well, it certainly will take time. There's no doubt about it. But when I say, when you go into rural communities in Utah and you feel like you're going back in time, some of that, you're right, is what people like. Frankly, I like it.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
I would rather live, as remote as
For
possible. Sure. I live near here, actually, but I would rather live as far away as possible.
How's your commute?
Into this for the podcast, it was nothing. It was great. It was 10 minutes. But but there are also some not so good ways, where there just is an opportunity, or they're trying to hold on to cold jobs that are disappearing, and they're desperate to, for opportunity. So I agree with you. I think it doesn't happen quickly, but as you point out with Pluralsight, eventually there's a, development reaches a point where somebody's like, a company says, we can extend this far out and this will work. We can build a site here, and we can still get talent here, and this can still work. But I think in the near term, in my opinion, it's about, making investments in infrastructure like broadband, but also ensuring that there's medical care and good schools for kids. And that creates an opportunity for people to work remotely. So you don't have to relocate a company headquarters to Nephi, or even to Carbon County.
Right.
It's you can have people working there. They're making money. They're spending in the local economy. And the more people who do that, the more talent there is in these places. And that lays the groundwork for maybe a decade from now. I get it. It takes time. All of a sudden, there's enough critical mass for something to get started. And maybe those people who are there meeting together, getting together, maybe they start something themselves. But it takes time and investment. But I think that should be our shared goal in Utah, is to expand this opportunity.
Yeah, I like the idea. You have to start with the basics, right? It has to be somewhere you want to live, and you can get all the resources you need to raise a family, to live there, and all that type of stuff. I think that's smart. Let's talk about this guy you're running against.
Okay.
Mike Lee. Why take on Mike Lee?
Well, Mike Lee, I believe, has become a poster child for the politics of division and extremism in our country, and that's just not who we are as Utahns.
Was it the Moroni stuff? Is that what?
Well, that's certainly. I mean, that was certainly a shocking and false portrayal in comparison. I think we all, for those who didn't see it, in October of 2020. Senator Lee was on stage with Trump campaigning to an audience of members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and he compared Trump to a revered figure in the Book of Mormon, Captain Moroni, who's honest and brave and wise and all the things. And look, people have all kinds of opinions about Donald Trump. Plenty of people in Utah voted for Trump, whether they liked him or not, because they wanted a Republican in office, et cetera. It's complicated. I get it. Everybody has their opinion. But most people do not look at Donald Trump and say, this is a man of high moral character. They don't say, this is a man who should be compared to Captain Moroni. So I think that what was shocking about that was that, Senator Lee took something that is precious to many Utahns and exploited it for his own personal political gain. And what I hear from people is that whether you're a member of the church or not, whether you're a Republican or Democrat, that was something that shouldn't have happened. And I think there's a broader concern that Senator Lee takes things that are precious to us, whether it's our Constitution or our elections, and exploits them for his own personal gain. I think another reason why I'm running against him is that he was at the center of the effort to overturn our last election. Now, I know what it's like to lose an election. It's no fun. We all experience that as voters. It's no fun, but that's the way our system works. There's something much bigger at stake. That is the health of our democracy, the health of our democratic republic. And in order for it to be healthy, we have to have elections that are free and fair, and that we have to respect the outcomes of those elections, especially when we don't like them. And Senator Lee urged Trump's allies to find fake electors that would overturn the election. He called them alternative slates of electors. And that was, I believe, an egregious betrayal of the Constitution, which he swore an oath to uphold and defend. And for a state like ours that was founded by people who sacrificed greatly, including my ancestors and Senator Lee's ancestors, for a state like ours to have someone like him representing us who would so easily betray those generations of sacrifices because they wanted their political tribe to hold on to political power at the expense of the country and our future, is just absolutely unacceptable. But I do think our politics are just broken in general. I think Lee has catered to the extremes. I'm worried about the extremes on both ends of the political spectrum, and this just ain't Utah. It just isn't. And I know that we can help lead the country forward, but we're going to have to make a change on this front. And it's through fighting division and lies with truth and unity. And that's what this campaign is about, and that's why this is now a dead heat.
It's interesting too because Lee at the Republican convention in 2016 tried to stop Trump from getting the nomination, right? Because he was a big Ted Cruz supporter, and he eventually came around and is obviously now one of Trump's favorite senators and that type of thing, which is an interesting. You have an interesting balance. You have to in order to win this thing, right? Because there's probably the majority of the state would probably still vote for Trump, don't you think? Or am I wrong about that? You're on the road more than I am, so you have a sense for that.
Well, look, according to our polling, Trump and Biden are both polling in the high 30s.
Oh, I see.
So we're not fans of either here. I think. I think most Utahns realize that neither side is getting it done. And that's the opportunity for change. But you're right about Senator Lee and about his background. I mean, look, he campaigned against Trump on the floor of the Republican National Committee.
Supported Ted Cruz in the primary.
Ted Cruz, but also knew that Trump was dangerous. And Senator Lee and I spoke during that time, and I knew he was as concerned as I was about what Trump might do to the Constitution. And neither of us were supporting Hillary Clinton. But we also knew that Trump was a danger to the Constitution. And in fact, Senator Lee on Election Day in 2016 voted for me and was public about it. But then as Trump won and took power, Senator Lee very quickly changed. And I think this is an example of what we've spoken about earlier, which is people putting their own interests and their own ambitions ahead of the interests of the people. And that's what I think happened there. I think Senator Lee understood that more political opportunity was there for him if he got on board with Trump and if he became very loyal to Trump. And so that's what he did. Now, I talked to people in Utah. I just spoke to a fellow about a month ago here in Lehigh, actually, just up the road a little bit. And he was telling me that he voted for Trump twice, but he didn't like Trump, but he held his nose and voted for him because he wanted Republican policies.
Well, it's a choice, right? That's what's interesting about elections. It is a choice. It's not like everyone's picking this is the very best man. It's like you're picking between, in 2016, you're picking between him or Hillary, except for here in Utah and a couple other states, we also got to vote for you.
Right.
Or you're picking between Trump and Biden.
In 2020,
right?
It was one of two, basically.
You got to pick between two.
But what this guy told me was very interesting. He said, look, I voted for Trump twice, didn't love him, but did it because of these policies, X, Y, and Z. But Lee got too close to Trump. And that's why I can't support him anymore. And that's what a lot of people outside of Utah don't get it. They say, well, Utah's, a Trump state. And I tell them, no, it is not. It's far more complicated than that. We're neither a Republican nor a Democratic state. We are a state that I think is still committed to our core values and committed to our system of self-government, most of us. And look, many of us made tough decisions in recent elections. I have too. I haven't liked my choices either. I haven't liked the options I've been given either, which is why, in part, I did what I did in 2016. But for him to say that, I think a lot of and we know because we see the data, there are a lot of Utahns like that who, yes, they voted for Trump. They were never Trump supporters, and they're upset with Lee because he didn't do his constitutional duty. If you're elected to Congress, you should work with whoever's in the White House. And if I were elected, I would work with whoever's there to do good things for Utah and the country. But at the same time, your job is to hold them accountable. And you got to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. You have to do those two things, work with people to do good things and hold them accountable. That's your job. It's not just become a sycophant for whoever's in the White House because that's what offers the most opportunity for you. Maybe it's a Supreme Court nomination, maybe it's a donation or whatever it is. That's not the job. And that is a corruption of the system. And I think that's where Lee went. I think he just lost his way. He did not, in the end, have the mettle to withstand the pressures of Washington in that environment. And we need leaders who have that.
Who did you vote for in 2020? I don't know if I know that.
Well, I voted for Joe Biden because I couldn't vote for Donald Trump, and I just didn't think that he, was a moral example that I could I could offer to my, to my family or to my friends and say, this is who I'm supporting. Now, obviously, that wasn't my ideal choice. I would have rather, have voted for Mitt Romney and
Right.
still hope that he'll run again. But I couldn't support Donald Trump, and I'm deeply concerned that neither party is giving us options for Utahns that we're going to be excited about supporting. And that's why I think we've got to make the change ourselves.
What about like in 2024? Who would you hope that these two parties put up?
I would love to see Mitt Romney run for president again as a Republican. On the Democratic side, I've thought less about that, but I would love to see on both sides leaders who are capable and interested in bringing people together. So a Democrat who can win Republican votes and a Republican who can win Democratic votes. That's what I would like to see. That's a healthier kind of politics. We've gotten away from that now. Now everybody just talks to their own side, and then it's a game of who can turn out the most, and who can turn out the most voters on their side, and that's the contest. That's not the way it has been in the past. It used to be that you'd get through the primary and then you try to appeal to a broader set of voters. We just don't typically do that anymore. But I have to say, Clint, what I'm excited about in this campaign is that as we go around the state doing these events, so people host what we call meet and greets, right? So we're in their homes, we're in their backyards, we're in their local parks, et cetera. When people show up to our events, to a McMullin campaign event, they know that they are showing up to a political event that is going to be widely attended by members of the opposing party or parties. So if you're Republicans showing up, knowing that there will be Democrats there and independents and members of the United Utah Party, and vice versa. And it occurred to me, a few weeks ago, just how special that is. Where else in American politics is there a campaign or regular political events where people in a campaign, as a part of a campaign, where people are showing up knowing they're attending an event with members of the opposing party? I don't think it's happening anywhere else in the country, but it should. And that's what I'm talking about. When I talk about Utah leading the way forward in the political realm, that's what I'm talking about. We have a different way of doing things here. It's a healthier kind of politics when we're our best selves. That is what's special here, and I think we need to take that to the rest of the country.
I'm always fascinated by folks like yourself who make the decision and the sacrifice, because I really do think it is a sacrifice to jump in the arena and to get you're going to get attacked. Your family's going to get attacked. Even what was it? You had this crazy driver or something who ran you up, not even just attacked personally or on Twitter or normal campaigns, but you're putting some real things at risk, which is crazy. One of the things I want to ask you, because one of the things I think that the other side or your opponent and kind of their group is pushing is around this Roe v. Wade stuff. In 2016, you said, I'm more pro-life than Donald Trump. You were for, I believe, overturning Roe v. Wade in 2016. Correct me if I'm wrong there. And Trump came in and appointed 3 justices that did manage to overturn Roe v. Wade just recently. And as I understand it, your position there has changed. Is that right?
My position hasn't changed. I'm still pro-life. In 2016, I was the chief policy director for the House Republicans. Yeah. So I was coming from the trenches of the partisan fight.
And this has been a fight, not to cut you off, in the conservative movement for Republicans for decades.
Yeah.
Decades they've been trying to do this.
Yeah, well, that's true. But I came from that partisan fight in 2016. I mean, I looked at Trump and knew that he was a danger. I believed a danger to the Republican. I had good reasons for that, and frankly, especially after January 6th, I'm pretty confident I was right. But also, I wasn't a Democrat and wasn't going to be voting for Secretary Clinton. And so, I came out of that experience, launched a modest presidential campaign for 3 months at the end when I and other Republicans who were concerned about Trump failed to recruit a more significant person. And I wanted to represent principled conservatives and Republicans because I knew that they otherwise didn't have a choice in the election. And I wanted to give them an option that they could stand for. I wanted to represent them. But after that, since then, I've realized that our partisanship and the divisions in our politics are tearing our country apart, and they are threatening our future. It has gotten to the point now where really the future of our country, the future of America, is threatened by how divided we are now. We're not solving problems. We're becoming weaker. Major foreign authoritarians realize it, and they become more aggressive. They're grabbing land. They're grabbing resources, and our intellectual property. I mean, we are at risk right now. It is and we have got to come together to solve major challenges and to strengthen the country, or we're going to lose it. I mean, people who think America is infinite and will always have, we'll always have freedom in America, they're wrong. I've seen that fail overseas. It can fail here. So since then, I've realized that we have to come together to solve problems. And I just don't see that happening. On this issue in particular, abortion and reproductive rights, the extremes on this just exploit this issue and tear the country apart, turn Americans against each other. And I'm trying to find a more productive way forward on this issue. I think what we see happening around the country where states are passing laws that would force a 10-year-old rape victim to carry a pregnancy to term, it's awful and it's wrong. Or other extremist laws. Now we're talking about banning contraception of all things. I think it's crazy. Right. What the data say that the clear answer to this, the clear answer to overcoming the core challenge, which is unwanted pregnancies and women finding themselves in impossible situations, is actually increasing access to contraception, and it's doing more to support women, children, and families. For me, as a pro-life Utahn, that is the answer. It is not a never-ending tug of war over the law that is going to tear the country apart and create a public health crisis for women and children around the country. It is addressing the core issue. And this coalition that we're building, that we formed here in Utah, is committed to finding a more constructive way forward and standing up to the extremes on this issue. And that is what we are doing.
One of the other sides say, I hear what you're saying, and I think a lot of people agree with you. One of the other sides say that's what overturning Roe v. Wade did, was it brought this issue and this decision back to the states, and the states should be making this decision, not the federal government. Or are you saying like the federal government should have a role in this decision?
I'm saying that in this environment, with how divided we are, with the extremes poised to pass crazy laws around the country that, again, are going to prevent people from traveling or force a rape victim to carry a pregnancy to term, et cetera. In this divided state of our country, I'm not so sure that overturning Roe was the most constructive way forward on this issue. Now, I think that the way to solve this issue, because right now each party is going to fight over the law. That's going to go on. That's going to go on forever unless we address the underlying issue, which is, again, unwanted pregnancies and women and children being in impossible situations. And if we address those issues, the abortion rate in America declines. And so when we've done more on those fronts, and by the way, for years, the abortion rate in America had declined because we were doing more on those fronts. And, over the course of the last 3 to 4 years, the abortion rate in America increased because we withdrew access to contraception, did less to support women, children, and families. And that is the wrong approach. And so, I'm trying to find a way now in 2016 or now versus 2016. I have a much greater recognition for the danger that political polarization and extremism presents to our country. And I'm trying to find a more constructive way forward on this issue, but also on many other issues. I mean, that's what my campaign is about. It's about finding a more constructive way forward. We could talk about a range of other issues where I would, give you, similar thoughts. But this is the most difficult one because, frankly, it is, of course, it's hard to imagine a more important issue than an issue relating to the creation of life and to the sustaining of life that is outside of the womb as well. I mean, can you imagine what would be a more complicated and more difficult and a more important issue than that? It's hard for me to do that. It's hard for me to imagine an issue that would be more important. So it's difficult, but there is a sensible way forward that doesn't require us to tear the country apart.
This issue also highlighted something that if you're elected to the Senate, you will be a part of, which is this process of nominating Supreme Court justices and appointing them to the bench. The president nominates them, the Senate confirms, as you know. And there is calls to expand the Supreme Court, right? To they call it like stacking the Supreme Court, however you want to like phrase it. Are you okay with 9? Do you think that we stick with 9?
I think we need to. I think if we start adding numbers to the Supreme Court, it just never ends. We will never see the end of it. I've lived in countries, again, where people have done that. I lived in a particular country where there was a military coup, and once the dictator came to power, he stacked the court, and that was the end of the court because the court was stacked with his allies over whom he had tremendous leverage. That's why he put them there, and that was the end of it. So if we start stacking the court here, what we're going to find in America is that every time a new party comes to power, they add their own people to the court so that the ratio is in their favor. And we just cannot have that. The court will lose all legitimacy. We will lose the rule of law in America. And that's it. That's the end of the republic. So people who are calling for adding numbers to the court, I think, are very short-sighted and really don't understand what they're asking for. I think it would be very destructive.
How did you get the Democrats, and I ask you this, but maybe just more broadly, to not nominate someone and rally their support around you? Someone who is not a Democrat, right, and is an independent. How did that all come about?
Look, I think that I campaign on our ideals as a country. I campaign that we're created free. I campaign that we're of equal value, and therefore we have a system of self-government, a democracy, and we have elections and a constitution. And all of these things are worth protecting, and that we need to protect them now. And that's a powerful message. It's a unifying message. That is, and I'll open the strategy book right here. That's the strategy. I talk about these things. Democrats come, Republicans come, independents, United Utah Party, third-party types. They join the effort. People think, oh, that's political pablum. You're just talking about our ideals. Doesn't mean anything. No, it means a lot. Our strength as a country is primarily sourced from those ideals. When we abandon those ideals, Abraham Lincoln talked about this. When we abandon our ideals, our country weakens, it divides against itself, and even its future is a question. It's jeopardized. And so that's what I campaign on. I think we need to go back to basics as a country. And that's why I campaign on those things. And when I do, we see our coalition grow. And that was my message to Democrats. It's my message to Republicans. It's my message to everybody. And that is what convinces them. Now, of course, Democrats already don't like Mike Lee and want to replace him. But that's not enough. We have to build a coalition based on something positive and our own vision. And my vision is recommitting to those core ideals, strengthening our system of self-government, and finding common ground to solve problems. I mean, Clint, in every aspect of our lives, whether it's at home with our families, whether it's at work, whether it's, you name it, in every element of our lives, we know that the more constructive way to conduct ourselves is to find common ground to solve problems, and we do it. We do it all the time. But in politics, somehow we don't do that anymore. And it's crazy. The idea that a country of 330 million people is somehow going to be able to govern itself if we all say it's my way or the highway. I mean, speaking about Senator Lee, for example, the Senate has passed a slate of bipartisan bills recently. Mitch McConnell voted for 5 of them. Mitt Romney voted for 3 of them. Mike Lee was one of only a few senators who voted no on every single one. If Mike Lee sees a bill that he agrees with 95% of its content but disagrees with 5% of it, he'll vote no because of that 5%. And Utah suffers as a result, but also the bigger picture is we can't govern ourselves like that. If you can get 3/4 of a loaf, you got to take it. And that's what's good for Utah. That's what's good for the country. But that's what my campaign is about, and that's how we've been able to build a cross-partisan coalition.
I could talk to you forever, so I'll wrap it up with 2 final questions. One of the more interesting arguments for your campaign is you won't caucus with either party, and you've committed to that. How does that actually work? That's happened before, right? Like maybe Bernie Sanders did that for a second, and then he caucused with the Democrats. Does it happen that often?
It hasn't happened since the 1950s.
Really?
There's been a true independent in the Senate. I believe it's been quite some time. I think it's been since the
Maybe Bernie just said he was independent, but he always caucused with the Democrats.
As far as I know, he was always caucusing with Democrats, but I don't really know.
Yeah.
I mean, perhaps there was a brief time where he didn't. I don't really know the arrangement there. But But as far as I can tell, I believe it's been over 50 years since there was a true independent in the Senate. But some people say, well, maybe it doesn't work then. Well, I say what's happening now doesn't work. I mean, our Congress is broken. What is aside recently from this, there's been a cross-partisan group in the Senate that's been working together and passing bills, and that's great. There's been some partisan bills in legislating as well, but what I'm more encouraged by is this bipartisan group that's actually doing things that make sense and that help our country with inflation and other challenges we're facing. But Senator Lee isn't a part of that group. We have one senator, and Senator Romney, who's a part of that group, but Senator Lee is not. And I know that if we win this race, and we are now, and I think your listeners will soon see, maybe they'll see by the time this podcast hits the air, they will see that this is a very, very, very tight race, a neck and neck race that we have a real opportunity to win. We may very well win this race. And if we do, it will make Utah, and specifically this coalition that we're building, the most influential in the nation. It will mean that Utah is the most influential state in the union. And with that, I believe we will do a tremendous amount of good for ourselves, but also for the country. I mean, no one, when they're writing a bill, Clint, and if you were sitting in the Senate writing a bill that had a chance of passing, nobody doing that stops and says, I wonder what Mike Lee thinks about this bill. It just never happens. And the reason it never happens is because they already know he's going to vote no. He's sit on his hands until it's time to vote no, and then he'll go complain about it on cable news. Senator Romney takes a different approach. Every single week you hear that Senator Romney's in the room negotiating a better deal for Utah, for our interests here, and for the country, finding common ground with Democrats and other Republicans. We need two senators who will do that. And if we have two senators doing that, it gives us the opportunity as a state to push back against our broken politics and to change them for the better. And we're a small state, we're just over 3 million people, but we can change the country for the better. And we are poised to do it, and we can do it through this race.
My final question is around the polarization of this country. I mean, I've never in my lifetime, and just as a somewhat of a student of history, never heard the word Civil War thrown out as much as I have heard recently, and the division is so crazy. What can one person do? What can one senator do to really change that, tone it down? And they're both extremes are very loud, and I think they are very loud because maybe they don't feel like they're being heard, right? What can one senator do to avoid the worst possible thing I can think of?
Yeah, I mean, I've been troubled by that as well. And, you're seeing, Harvard did some polling. I think it's probably a year old now, but things have gotten worse then, not better, in which young voters, a shocking number of young voters believe it was, possible or expected to see a civil war in America during their lifetime. I don't think we're there, but we're certainly moving down that. We're trying. We're inching there. So we can't let that happen. What can a senator do? First of all, yes, I think it's important for senators or for anyone in elected office to listen to everybody, and I'm committed to doing that. Sometimes ideas are, it was once an extreme idea to end slavery, for example. So I don't mean to suggest that there are no good ideas that come from current extremes in politics,
Mm-hmm.
and that's why you should always be mining everywhere for good ideas. But I think there are more bad ideas on the extremes than there are good ideas.
Mm-hmm.
But I've got an open door. But what can one senator do? What one senator can do is show the entire country where there is common ground on the challenges we face. And what one senator can do is stand up to the extremes that would do damage to our country for some terrible reason. There's no good reason to do damage to our country, of course. But one senator can do that. I mean, this Senate is perfectly divided right now. I don't know how it will be after this election, but it will still be closely divided. And in the Senate like that, we've all learned over the last couple of years that the senators who are willing to act with greater independence to represent their constituents, willing to say no to party bosses, willing to say no to the special interests and to the extremist factions, and just do what makes sense for their voters and for their country, for our country, they have more influence in the Senate, and I would say in Washington, than anyone else. And so one senator in this kind of Senate, this kind of closely divided Senate, can have a tremendous impact. And if we have two senators who take that approach, which I believe if we win, I think we will. I think Senator Romney and me will take a similar approach. And again, the possibilities for us to change our politics for the better in our country are tremendous. They really are. And I don't think we have to guess about it. You look at the senators now who have the most influence in that chamber. It is those who are acting with greater independence, as I say. And certainly if we win this one, we will be the prototypical example of an independent in the Senate, and that will yield a tremendous opportunity. So that's what excites me. That's why I'm in this race.
Evan, thanks so much for coming on. Good luck on the campaign trail. Man, we could talk for another hour about everything that's going on.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll have you back, but you got an election to win, so best of luck.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure, and I look forward to coming back.
Likewise.